Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, July 16, 2019. I hope we have all recovered from going back where we came from. Are we ready to start another show? I don't know. Let's see. We'll dig out what there is in pocket. I know there's a million things to catch up on. Of course, Trump woke up earlier this morning and started back in on his rage tweeting. And, you know, you got to wonder how long people are going to put up with that. But I guess he thinks everyone loves it. And that we all can't wait for his next one. I don't know. I'm not sure what to tell you. I noticed this morning along the way that who was it? Oh, Lisa Murkowski had, I guess, noticed that the president was losing his friggin' marbles and said yesterday, you know, I guess she had to issue a statement about his latest racist statements, and although she went with spiteful comments in this thing, there's no excuse for the president's spiteful comments. They were absolutely unacceptable, and this needs to stop. Which, of course, now leads us to the question, what if instead of stopping, they actually resume the next time the president wakes up and rolls himself out of bed? Because that's what's happening. I don't have to read you the tweets. You may have seen them already. If not, you know, I mean, don't bother. It's more of the same. He's continuing to rage on. He sees, of course, he's caught in the feedback loop of watching the telly in the morning and sees, look, I'm very famous for my statements. I'm going to have to continue doing them. Everyone loves it. I'm going to keep it up. And that way I'll stay in the news. And I don't know whether, I don't think I've ever really subscribed to the, oh my gosh, look out, he's distracting from something storyline, because there's only one story with him. He's crazy, unfit for the presidency, and in 50,000 different ways. And we can read a list, if you want, of the various ways in which he's unfit for the presidency. David Rothkopf put one together, and we'll probably run through it at some point, like maybe the very next thing that we do. But in the meantime, I'll tell you, good morning, welcome to the show. Daily Coast Radio is live now. Bill is back in place in Portland, Maine, and lets us know that this is the case. Today, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, this is interesting, puts the grow in grousing. It's never been done before, but it's just crazy enough to work, and maybe that's the sort of thing that can get me some favorable coverage from the pundits this morning. Yeah, it's just crazy enough to work. It's the optics of grousing that we really have to concern ourselves with. Lots of stuff, like I said, to catch up on. We'll see if we can't read through a few of these stories that have been waiting in the wings. We'll see if they're still relevant. We'll see whether outrage pushes them to the side. I see Congressman Don Beyer also hitting the nail on the head this morning, tweeting, yesterday, I guess, last evening. We only see it this morning, you see. It's part of the way Twitter works here. Let's see. He says, when you're a Republican president, you can give an inauguration speech about American carnage, say America isn't great, compare its intelligence agents to Nazis, slander its war heroes, and tell American members of Congress to go back to their countries. They let you do it. Yeah, that's largely what's happening here, and I thought a pretty good encapsulation for your average congressperson to just be tweeting about about 9 o'clock last night, so maybe 13 hours since he's tweeted that, and I just thought I would pass that along. I mentioned to you that David Rothkopf had put together a rather impressive list of the various things that could be perhaps driving you crazy at the moment. It goes on for a while, so it's sort of impressive at that, and it begins to hit you. It's the racism, of course, but it's not just the racism, it's sex crimes. But it's not just the sex crimes, it's the concentration camps. But it's not just the concentration camps, it's the corruption. But it's not just the corruption, it's being a traitor. But it's not just being a traitor, it's the obstruction of justice. But it's Not just the obstruction of justice, it's the attacks on rule of law. But it's not just the attacks on the rule of law, it's the assault on freedom of the press. But it's not just the assault on freedom of the press, it's the pathological lying. But it's not just the pathological lying, it's the unfitness for office. But it's not just the unfitness for office, it's the incompetence. But it's not just the incompetence, it's the attacks on our most important allies and alliances. But it's not just the attacks on our most important allies and alliances, it's the systematic destruction of our environment. But it's not just the systematic destruction of our environment, it's the violation of international treaties and agreements. But it's not just the violation of international treaties and agreements, it's the embrace of our enemies. But it's not just the embrace of our enemies, it's the defense of murdering dictators. But it's not just the defense of murdering dictators, it's the serial undermining of our national security. But it's not just the serial undermining of our national security, it's the nepotism. But it's not just the nepotism, it's the attacks on our federal law enforcement and intelligence communities. But it's not just the attacks on our federal law enforcement and intelligence communities, it's the fiscal recklessness. But it's not just the fiscal recklessness, it's the degradation of office and of public discourse in America. But it's not just the degradation of the office and the public discourse in America, it's the support of Nazis and white supremacists. But not just the support of Nazis and white supremacists, it's the dead in Puerto Rico and at the border. But it's not just the dead in Puerto Rico and at the border, it's the turning the U.S. government into a criminal conspiracy to empower and enrich the president and his supporters. But it's not just the turning of the U.S. government into a criminal conspiracy to empower and enrich the president and his supporters. It's weaponization of politics in America to attack the weak. But it's not just the weaponization of American politics to attack the weak. It's all these things together and the threat of worse to come. It's the damage that cannot be undone. It's a pathology that has overtaken our politics and our society. The revelation that 40% of the population and an entire political party are profoundly immoral. It is a disease that has infected our system and is killing it. At the moment, we still have the wherewithal to fight back, but even those who recognize the dangers of this litany of crimes are proving too complacent, too inert in the face of this threat. It is one of those moments in the history of a country when there is a choice to be made, a choice between having a future and not, between growth and decay, between democracy and oligarchy, between what we dreamt of being and what even our founders feared we might become. This does go on at some length. I guess I'll finish it. I was mostly interested in the list of the things that it wasn't just, but figure we'll go on and reach the conclusion here. If you can't, here we are. This is a moment for leaders to step up. Well, good. Anybody? To challenge each of these abuses via every legal means available, to organize and draw attention to them, to blow the whistle if you're in government and you're being asked to violate your oath, to resist and refuse to be complicit. If you can't do those things that make your voice heard and join a movement, support a political candidate, donate money, register voters, fight voter suppression. But whatever you do, resist becoming numb. Resist the temptation to let the recitation of old crimes and new become a deadening drone. Oops, sorry about that, everybody. Everyone matters in times like these. Everyone must stand up for what's right in their homes, in their schools, in their workplaces, in their churches and synagogues and mosques. We are approaching a great national decision about whether the American experiment will succeed or fail. Whether this moment does what 2 world wars, a civil war, and countless past misjudgments and missteps could not. We will make it together, resist, offer a better alternative, embrace that alternative, and the best leaders we can find, or succumb. Let the inertia of some among us mark the end of what for 2.5 centuries was an idea so compelling it inspired the world. Very interesting. Something to think about this morning. Really, I just like the compilation of, I like the whole thing, but the compilation of things that are going on, of course, although it did get at the end a little bit, I think that maybe there was a restatement of at least the corruption angle. More florid language, of course, well worth discussing, but if it basically comes down to corruption, well, then it's corruption. There wasn't a lot, And I just thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. And speaking of interesting ways of looking at things, this morning a lot of attention for Amanda Marcotte coming up with an interesting parallel, let's say, to what was going on. I guess starting with, as inspiration, if you will, I guess, let's see, a tweet from Daniel Radosh from The Daily Show, one of the writers of The Daily Show, with, I guess, a clip from the New York Times. You know, there was in addition to a lot of the horrible things that happened, there was a lot of horrible coverage of the things that happened. And the usual suspects involved in both sidesing everything. The clip he took here from the New York Times, I don't know if I read the article or not, or maybe it's tucked away in one of the things in Pocket. But the clip here is both the willingness of Republicans to attach extremist labels to Democrats, ooh, look out, and the Democratic assault against Mr. Trump. Yeah. As a racist and white supremacist, both these things together both presage a particularly bitter 2020 campaign. Do you think? I guess that's an accurate prediction. Except sort of misstates the problems. And, you know, as Daniel was saying here, with Trump being racist and Democrats calling Trump racist, both sides, yargle, bargle, bargle, etc. Okay, yes, well, that does present a particular problem. Amanda had a different look at it. And cast it in light of horror movies and slasher movies. Both the willingness of Jason, the famous horror movie slasher, both the willingness of Jason to chase down teenagers with a knife to murder them, and the unfortunate volume teens use when they scream for help, presage a particularly bitter and unpleasant camping trip. You could say that. She goes on a little while longer, a few more tweets. While everyone agrees that Jason's serial killing is disruptive, the teens are doing the public peace no favors by both screaming loudly and then ruining the floorboards by bleeding to death on them. Both sides could do better. I mean, we really did see this kind of stuff circulating yesterday. The problem is not with the teens, a teen spokeswoman said. It's that Jason keeps murdering them. When asked if the teens planned to apologize for the disruptive screaming and the stains left from bleeding to death, she refused to comment. See, the inherent evil, right? And while serial killing is a controversial move, Jason's spokeswoman felt it would win out over the teens. Ultimately, voters find teens annoying, she argued. They're pleased to live, and their tendency to trip while running for their lives does them no favors. Allies of Jason objected to the word murder to describe slashing teens to death. The real problem is the teens, a voter in a nearby diner said. If they want to live, they should spend less time making out with each other and more time singing patriotic songs. I wish the methods weren't so harsh, piped up the diner's companion, who was wearing a hat with a picture of Jason reading, "Make camping great again." Maybe he could smother them to death instead of slash them, but ultimately, he's my serial killer, and I trust his judgment. So I thought that put things rather succinctly, too. It's not news articles, it's just opinions about the news, and sometimes we'll share those things on the show as well. In fact, there are plenty of them to look through. Let's see. By way of updating the news and working my way through the various things that I've put away in Pocket, because it's so difficult to prioritize them, because of the list that we read to you earlier. I mean, any one of these things would just be a distraction from all the rest anyway, right? I thought I would comb through the headlines and stories put away in Pocket and see if we can't dash through a number of them. But like I said, as by way of news, let me open this one up here. We have Kellyanne Conway is the latest to defy a subpoena from Congress per instructions from the Justice Department, and under the same claim of absolute immunity. She was being called to testify about the report, I guess, from, was it the Office of Personnel Management that put it out, or was it a different office? I can't recall who put out the report, basically insisting that in normal times the president ought to consider, say dismissing her from federal service for repeated violations of the Hatch Act. So they wanted to ask her some questions about that. But the Justice Department says that Kellyanne Conway, quote, is absolutely immune from compelled congressional testimony in her capacity as a senior advisor to the president. There is a Office of Legal Counsel opinion released and attached here in support of that argument. It's not that long, but I don't know if combing through a new OLC opinion is worth doing. But at the very least, we can say, at least this time, they are on much safer ground, arguably, discussing Kellyanne Conway as a senior advisor to the president. That she actually is in that role. And unlike some of the previous claims of absolute immunity where they've just slapped that on to whoever they wanted to protect from testimony, they at least have that going for them. I don't know how comfortable we are with the language that they're using. And I think the absolute immunity thing, I'm not actually up to date. We've touched on this a couple of times because they've used this excuse a couple of times. But up to date on OLC opinion with regard to immunity for top aides. I mean, it does make a certain amount of sense as a parallel to the deliberative process privilege for certain documents. I think it's probably not completely unwise to have such protection for top advisors to the president. It's just that it's particularly frustrating for this instance because it's hard to believe that the president is taking advice in any normal understanding of the word. It's difficult to think of these advisors as advisors in the normal sense of the word. So, but I think there it's probably pretty easy to think that maybe our bias is getting the better of us, and there are 10,000 other things for which he ought to have been impeached 100 years ago anyway. So I don't know how much importance to hang on Hatch Act violations by Kellyanne Conway. But there it is. That's where we stand legally, and we'll see what happens next. As I mentioned in the Morning Post today, the schedule says that the House of Representatives will be taking up a resolution condemning the president for his racist attacks. And that's a good thing, and it's timely. But it does mean, because time is limited on the House floor, that and they don't really want to work very hard, that last week's promise that Tuesday would see a vote on contempt of Congress resolutions for Attorney General Barr and Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross will have to be put off. That may make the schedule tomorrow, but tomorrow is Wednesday, and if it slips another day, we're talking about Thursday, and Thursday is knockoff for the weekend day, particularly in the summer. Not that it matters a great deal, because I suppose even if they fit it in today, well, you know the story about contempt of Congress. What would we be getting out of that? We'd have the vote. They'd be held in contempt of Congress, or there'd be a resolution saying that was the case, and they would then refer it to the U.S. attorney, and then nothing happens. And it's going to take us a couple of months to realize that nothing is happening, nothing's going to happen, and then we'll have to decide what to do about it. And then the decision will be something, too close to the election, yada, yada. So anyway, just add that to the list, just so you know. That resolution will be pushed back by a day, and the next one in the pipeline is Kellyanne Conway. All right, so let's see. Other items up for consideration. Well, there's a couple of good pieces here we'll skip over for the moment. And let's see. There were some things that I mentioned yesterday that we ought to probably consider reading today, because that will catch us up on the Netroots Nation aftermath. I mentioned to you first at the end of yesterday's show. Maybe we'll do things this way since we promised them yesterday. Although I did provide you the links, but you're busy people. Perhaps you prefer having these things read and discussed with on the morning program than spending your time. I know, typically, if you're like me, well, I'm sorry. But if you like to conduct your day the same way, you probably read the first couple paragraphs, said, yeah, this is worth reading, but I can't stop and read it now. I have to read about another outrage, or at least the first few paragraphs about another outrage, and catch up with it later. So, Politico's piece that I put aside is from Holly Otterbein, whose name I certainly would recognize if I had seen it before or read it aloud before. That's rather unusual. Sanders and Warren voters have astonishingly little in common. I think this is now becoming more obvious to most of you, with or without reading this piece. But I thought it was an interesting one that might help put a bow on things for Netroots Nation, unless, I don't know, let's say Armando has more to say about it, or anybody has more to say about it once. Certainly room for a recorded piece on that one, if you were lucky enough to attend the gathering in Philadelphia. All right, well, this one, of course, datelined Philadelphia, because I guess Holly Otterbein was there covering the gathering. Or maybe just hanging out in Philadelphia. That was another thing you could have done all weekend, too. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, she says, are two of the most ideologically aligned candidates in the Democratic primary, both left-wing populists who rail against a rigged economic system. Some of them rail against rigged other things, too. But this one is one I think we all agree on. But the fellow enemies of the 1% have surprisingly different bases of support. In poll after poll, Sanders appeals, I should say, because that's what it says, to lower income and less educated people. Warren beats Sanders among those with postgraduate degrees. Sanders performs better with men, Warren with women. Younger people who vote less frequently are more often in Sanders' camp. Seniors who follow politics closely generally prefer Warren. Sanders also has won over more African Americans than Warren. He earns a greater share of support from black voters than any candidate in the race, except for Joe Biden, according to the latest Morning Consult surveys. And I don't think that's been made explicit lately, though I'm not certain. I mean, we've discussed this so often with Greg that I can't be sure we didn't touch on it. But that's a big turnaround from, I think, where things stood mid-campaign last time around. But then again, it was a totally different situation. We were talking only about basically two candidates for most of that time. For progressive activists, the story continues, who are gathering this week, that would be last week, in Philadelphia at the annual Netroots Nation conference, it's both promising and a source of concern that the two leading left-wingers in the primary attract such distinct fans. It demonstrates that the progressive economic message can excite different parts of the electorate, but it also means that Sanders and Warren likely need to expand their bases in order to win the Democratic nomination. Or, 15 out of the 20 people who are in the race should drop out, and that will help sort things out itself. Anyway, put another way, if the voters could magically be aligned behind one or the other, it would vastly increase the odds of a Democratic nominee on the left wing of the ideological spectrum. The fact that Warren and Sanders' bases don't perfectly overlap hasn't garnered much public attention, but it's something very much on the minds of their aides and allies. It shows that the media does not base their perceptions on data that is publicly available, said Ari Robinhoft, chief of staff to the Sanders campaign. I think people develop overly simplistic views of politics that presume that people who live in the real world think the same way as elite media in D.C. and New York. It's not a given that Sanders voters would flock to Warren or vice versa if one of them left the race and endorsed the other. In Morning Consult, Reuters, Ipsos, and Washington Post ABC News polls, more Sanders supporters name Biden as their second choice than Warren, and a higher percentage of Warren voters pick Kamala Harris as their number two than Sanders, according to recent surveys. How interesting. Wes Bode, I guess, B-O-D-E, a retired contractor in the first-in-the-nation caucus state of Iowa, illustrates the point. He said he likes Sanders, that Sanders has new ideas, such as free college tuition, and recently attended one of his town halls in the state. But he's fond of Biden, too, because he's, quote, for the working man. It might seem unusual that voters' top picks for 2020 are the two candidates who best represent the opposite poles of the Democratic Party, but a person like Bode is actually more common than someone like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whose favorites are Sanders and Warren. For Sanders, the need to grow his base is a problem that dates back to his 2016 run. He failed to win the nomination that year, in large part because he was unable to win over older voters, especially older voters of color. Two places where Bernie has always struggled with is older voters and women to some degree, said Mark Longabaugh. I'm guessing at the pronunciation of that one. Longabaugh? All right. A top strategist to Sanders in 2016. Warren is identifiably a Democrat and runs as a Democrat, so I think many more establishment Democrats in the party are more drawn to her, whereas Bernie very intentionally ran for re-election as an independent and identifies as an independent and appeals to those who look inside the Democratic Party and think it's not their thing. Okay, well, I'm sure there's got to be some of that. During the 2020 campaign, Sanders' advisors have acknowledged that he needs to appeal more to older voters, and he's recently been holding more intimate events in the early states that tend to attract more senior crowds than his rallies do. His team is also trying hard to expand the primary electorate by turning out infrequent voters. Warren, meanwhile, is aggressively working to win African American support. Her allies argue that her performance at events such as Al Sharpton's National Action Network convention and She the People conference, that she has room to grow among black voters, and indeed she does. Okay, we'll continue with this article, move on to the other one I promised you after this short break. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are continuing with our reading here of the Politico piece. Sanders and Warren voters have astonishingly little in common. Holly Otterbein writing this one after the appearance, or after her visit, I guess, with Netroots Nation in Philadelphia. Let's see, where did we leave off here? We had, I guess, noted here that Sanders was working on his appeal to older voters, Warren on her appeal among African American voters. If you were looking to buy a rising stock, the story continues, you would look at future market share and indicators of strong fundamentals, said Adam Green. We know Adam, co-founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which backs Warren. Elizabeth Warren has consistently connected on a gut level with black audiences, getting standing ovations after connecting her inspiring plans to her personal story of struggle growing up poor in Oklahoma and being a single mom in Texas. Several Democratic operatives said they believe Warren has the ability to expand her base to include black women in particular. Well, all right. She impressed 2,000 top women of color activists at our conference, said Amy Allison, founder of She the People, aforementioned She the People. Elizabeth Warren has deepened, sharpened, and made racial justice a grounding component of her policies. A look at their poll numbers shows how distinct the pools of support for Sanders versus Warren are. 22% of Democratic primary voters who earn less than $50,000 annually supported Sanders, while 12% are for Warren, according to an average of the past 4 weeks of Morning Consult polling. Of those without college degrees, 22% are behind Sanders, 10% back Warren. Roughly the same percentage of voters with bachelor's degrees, 16% and 15% respectively, support Sanders and Warren. But among those with postgraduate degrees, 12% are for Sanders and 19% are for Warren. There's a similar split based on age, gender, and interest in politics, which is sort of important, I think, interest in politics. But okay, Sanders wins more than 1/3 of the 18 to 29-year-olds, while Warren gets 11% of them. Warren has the support of 13% of those aged 30 to 44, 12% of those aged 45 to 54, and 13% of those aged both 55 to 64 and 65 and up. Getting lost in the numbers here a little bit, but Sanders' support goes down as the age of voters goes up. He is backed by 25% of 30 to 44-year-olds, 17% of 45 to 54-year-olds, 12% of 55 to 64-year-olds, and 8% of those 65 and older. 20% of men support Sanders, and 11% support Warren. 18% of women are behind Sanders, and 14% behind Warren. Warren also performs best among voters who are, quote, extremely interested in politics, winning 17% of them, while Sanders is strongest among those who are, quote, not at all interested, 26%. But yet, how could that be true? And they still know who he is and are interested in voting for him. But okay. I mean, that's whatever. You want to hang that label of not at all interested in politics, I can, if you want to take it, you can take it. I have no idea what it's supposed to actually mean, though. As for black voters, 19% are behind Sanders, while 9% support Warren. With Biden still atop most polls, even after a widely panned performance at the first Democratic debate, some progressives still fear that Warren and Sanders could divide the left and hand the nomination to the former vice president. There's a lot of time left in this campaign, said Sean McElwee, co-founder of the liberal think tank Data for Progress. But one thing that's clear is that it's very important for the left that we ensure that we don't split the field and allow someone like Joe Biden to be the nominee. I saw, that's actually the end of the article, by the way, but I did see Armando commenting this morning and getting some agreement that I guess it was Biden on Morning Joe today. I mean, the only way I would know that is to see Armando complaining about it. But it sounded like he was being interviewed by Mika Brzezinski and not performing particularly well. And, some, I guess, indication as far as Armando was concerned that, he might not really end up being a particularly strong candidate. But that's not inconsistent with coming straight out of the box based more or less purely on name recognition and longing for normalcy and the last normal presidential administration and anybody associated with it who might still be eligible to run for president. But, given some time and we get to review his performance, we'll see how things go. He's, as we have noted, I think, every time he sort of gets the camera on and sits there for an extended period of time, people come away with a less than favorable impression. We'll see whether that continues for him or not. That's not like considered analysis. That's just what I have seen Armando comment this morning. One person's opinion about all this. But there was some expressing the fact that they had gotten a similar impression from his appearance this morning. I didn't see it, of course. I was preparing to read you stories like this. The other one that I promised you from yesterday, Amanda Turkle's piece, along with Daniel Marins and Kevin Robillard in HuffPost. Nancy Pelosi emerges as unexpected villain at Netroots Nation. She had a tough week among the progressive activists, and it's not looking like it's going to get much better because, of course, she's committed to a position that puts them in opposition puts her in opposition to, well, where most progressive activists probably are today with respect to constitutional duties, and those things are important. All right, let's see. Sure, Armando, we can certainly have you in to discuss things if you like in the 10 o'clock hour. I'll try and get through a couple more of these stories, and I did want to see if we could steer things back towards catching up with some of these other stories. Anyway, but Biden, important guy, and what he's doing, and we ought to watch these trends as the second debate looms. So we're going to definitely make some room for that as well. Nancy Pelosi, though, in the meantime, unexpected villain at Netroots Nation. Activists are furious that she has publicly criticized progressive members of the House Democratic Caucus. And a different focus. It's not solely about the impeachment question. There was a very important other dynamic happening this week, and let's take a look at it. Right. Squad and the media. Right, exactly. Armando's comments in the background. The chatter at Netroots Nation, the gang from HuffPost begins, a progressive gathering that attracts thousands of people each year. You know that was expected to be on the rising influence of the left in the 2020 presidential election. But frustration with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, once considered an avatar of San Francisco liberalism, though mostly by the other side and in a negative way, has emerged as a constant theme centered on her recent criticism of progressive members of her caucus. She doesn't act this way, and this is really the best point of all this, I think, to me. I don't know. Maybe that's overstating it. The one that resonates with me most clearly is she doesn't act this way when blue dogs say stupid S-word, so we'll say crap, about other Democrats and about the party and constantly criticize the party, said, well, what do you know, Marcos Militzis, founder of, Daily Kos, we'll skip over that, referring to a group of conservative House Democrats. For some reason, she's singling out these four for a special brand of conflict. It doesn't make any sense. And, of course, over the weekend, various folks hung the reasoning for that either on their being women of color or various other things. I think it has to do more with their progressivism than their being people of color, but, there are varying takes on that. I'll read you the organized thoughts first and get into the discussion later. Progressive discontent with the California Democrat has been simmering for months, with the feeling that the speaker has been putting the interests of the more conservative members of the caucus over the priorities of the left. She has pushed off pursuing impeachment of Trump and been slow to embrace ideas like the Green New Deal and Medicare for All. That's a mild way of putting it. But it burst into the open when Pelosi gave an interview to the New York Times, dismissing the power of four of the biggest progressive stars in the House, of course, AOC, Omar, Presley, and Rashida Tlaib being the four in this case. Four women believed a House measure to provide emergency funding for the migrant crisis at the border didn't provide sufficient restrictions on how the Trump administration could spend the money. It didn't. They were further incensed when the House later passed the weaker Senate version of the bill after moderates signaled that they would provide the votes to support it. And apparently, I have read varying accounts that the Democrats in the Senate actually also thought they were putting forth a proposal to go to conference on the thing and come up with something better, and they were surprised that the House moved to accept it as it was. Anyway, Omar said a vote for the bill was a vote to keep kids in cages and terrorize immigrant communities. All these people have their public whatever and their Twitter world, but they didn't have any following. There are four people, and that's how many votes they got, which is also not true. Pelosi said when asked about some of their comments, expressing her displeasure that they voted against the emergency funding legislation, and then chastised colleagues who did back it. I mean, I guess when I say this is the most resonant of the complaints for me, I mean, how often are we here explaining that the speaker considers it her job to give cover to conservative Democratic members who need to vote in opposition to the leadership position in order to preserve themselves with their bases in their districts. And there's not a word said about it. And the answer is every time. And it's not different either. Those members then, of course, maybe it's isolated in their local press, but they do go to speak to their local press afterwards and say that, here in whatever part of Pennsylvania, we're not for those same San Francisco values, but, blah, blah, blah. They give those interviews all the time. There's nothing different here. But Pelosi doesn't answer them in the press. But this time she does, and that's, I think, a legitimate complaint. Omar, Presley, and Tlaib, along with Congresswoman Deb Haaland from New Mexico, spoke on a keynote panel Saturday morning and received a boisterous standing ovation. The women of color who entered Congress, there are more than 4 votes, said Amy Allison. And by the way, there were more than 4 votes on their side, and they didn't only come from women of color either. It just happens that some of them came from white men and who are also liberal and progressive and didn't get yelled at, but okay. That's also part of the point. So, the women of color who entered Congress, there are more than 4 votes, said Amy Allison, again, founder of She the People and moderator of the panel. That's how she got in both the articles. For millions of us, they represent blood, sweat, and tears for us to have representation. They represent the best of American democracy. And yet, if you've read the news, they've faced attacks all year from the right wing and from the Democratic Party leadership. She added, to boos from the crowd. As a young person, I'm 19, not me, but her, I feel like I can relate to the 4 people we heard speaking today better than Nancy Pelosi, and it makes me angry that is the leadership of the Democratic Party. It's the leadership that the Democratic Party is basically putting up. Oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't, I don't know. I don't know Amy Allison at all. For all I know, she may be 19. I didn't get to watch the panel, but it wasn't her. It's Damon Alexander, who was 19. He's African-American political consultant from St. Louis. And he told the Huffington Post this after the panel, 19-year-old political consultant. It does happen. Pelosi's comments to the New York Times infuriated progressive members of the House and their allies and escalated the long brewing spat. Representative Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, tweeted that moderate Democrats might as well be members of the Child Abuse Caucus for supporting a weaker Senate version of the border funding. Youch. But moderates, too, were incensed by the public criticisms that their progressive colleagues were lobbing their way, implying that they didn't support immigrant children and wanted to hurt them. A senior Democratic aide said there's been longstanding frustration at the positions and comments of the squad, and I don't know who came up with that, but they ought to get paid, I guess. The squad, in this case, being Ocasio-Cortez, Omar, Presley, and Tlaib, and making it harder for the moderates to take positions they believe best represent their districts and help them win re-election. I don't know why 4 votes would worry them so much in their quest for re-election, but apparently it does. Or rather, I think they've taken the hint. They've been instructed, intentionally or otherwise, by the leadership to blame them for problems and to set themselves against it. And it may very well be, I guess it's possible, but I have my doubts about whether it's the case, that there's a, 11-dimensional chess going on here. These 4 representatives may be perfectly willing, may be perfectly willing for the sake of their cause to or for the sake of the Democratic majority, for that matter, to stand apart and allow moderate and conservative members to cast themselves against them. Why? I don't know. Whether it's going to really help, I don't know. In the end, they'll eventually instead be tied to San Francisco Nancy Pelosi by Republicans in the general election anyway. But I guess they feel like that they can withstand that because that's never really worked, whereas they're not sure whether they can survive being tied to the squad, but the answer is they can. And also, they will be anyway, so what's the damn difference? Anyhow, Netroots has never been the friendliest group for Pelosi, the article continues, generally being a crowd that likes to root for outsiders. The last time Pelosi spoke at the conference was in 2013. But the frustration with her this year was more pronounced than in the past, and many of the liberal activists here, including some who supported her fight to become speaker, when Democrats took back the majority in the 2018 elections, are baffled as to why she and the leadership team are aggressively picking fights with the progressive members. Yeah, I guess it should be pointed out that I think the squad also backed her and supported her fight to become speaker because, it made sense to do so. Okay, anyway, at the time, anyhow. Speaking at the panel on Friday, Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, tried to defend... How many have they got? At least 2. We've now named 2 of them here. Anyway, she tried to defend the pragmatic governing philosophy she argued was behind Pelosi's comments, but even she had to admit that the remarks were counterproductive. They are. I don't think those comments were helpful to a broader picture of how we build progressive power in the House and what it looks like relative to overall Democratic power, she said. Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon blamed Pelosi for the fact that ultimately a less progressive version of the border funding legislation ended up passing the House. This is what I had mentioned earlier. She's the leadership, so that's where the responsibility rests, he said during a Netroots discussion moderated by HuffPost on Friday, eliciting oohs and ahs from the audience. They don't usually call out the speaker for much of anything, but not often done from the Senate. The House has to carry its weight to restore the values of America. It failed on this occasion, he added, noting that a Democrat-controlled House should not be passing legislation that's a coalition of Republicans and conservative Democrats, which is what came out of the Senate. Jayapal said the Senate shares a fair amount of the blame, since a majority of the Democrats in the upper chamber voted for the bill. Also true. Pelosi has chastised her caucus members behind closed doors this week to stop tweeting their intra-party grievances and had directly criticized Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff for going after Pelosi and the moderate members on Twitter. And that is also true. And quite honestly, ordinarily, chiefs of staff would not do this. But I think I'll agree at least partially here with, I think it was Armando pointing this out. You really kind of have to decide on, are you going to be chief of staff and also Greg agreed on this as well. Chief of staff, or are you going to head up the pack? Ordinarily, chiefs of staff consider it a major mistake to get themselves quoted in a newspaper article in favor of their boss or even alongside their boss, unless they are echoing the sentiments of their boss and explicitly doing so. Even just stating the same thing but on your own behalf is not ordinarily done, but, okay. It's clear that they don't want to play by the ordinary run-of-the-mill rules anyway, and for good reason sometimes. But on Friday, the official Twitter account of the House Democratic Caucus, which also isn't supposed to be doing this, tweeted an attack on Saikat Chakrabarti. I'm hoping I got even close to that. That's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff. Chakrabarti, who is also a person of color, had criticized a position taken by Representative Sharice Davids, Democrat of Kansas, in a late June Twitter discussion, which the House Democrats' account resurrected. And I don't think I'll read you the exchange, but it is embedded there in the article. It'd be nice if everybody would just stop tweeting for a while. Hayland, a freshman member and one of the first Native American women elected to Congress, told reporters after her panel Saturday morning. Former Representative Donna Edwards of Maryland, who was a favorite of the Netroots crowd, cautioned in a Washington Post op-ed on Saturday that Pelosi needs to learn how to work with this new class of progressive fighters, but also gave a defense of the speaker. I came to Congress fighting with the old establishment, but within months I came to realize that Pelosi can work for us even as she works to protect moderates, Edwards said. I learned quickly that I could not fall on every sword. Both sides have been noting the racial politics of the fight. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus have come to Pelosi's defense, upset that Ocasio-Cortez and her allies in the Justice Democrats are targeting one of its members in primaries. But Ocasio-Cortez has called out Pelosi for going after the 4 members, who are all high-profile women of color. Credo Action, a progressive group at Netroots, also noted the bad optics of Pelosi singling out these women. We deserve better than white Democratic leaders who are willing to throw people of color under the bus to maintain their privilege, Credo Action co-director Heidi Hess has said. Nancy Pelosi needs to stop trying to shame and silence the progressive women of color in her caucus, stop enabling the moderates who want to compromise with Republicans' extremist agenda, and start leading her caucus with the urgency of someone who actually cares about the communities Trump is attacking every day. While the presidential election is still 16 months away, there were also warnings from progressives that excessive criticism of their ilk could discourage young people and people of color from voting. I think Nancy Pelosi needs to be very careful about making it seem she's denigrating the very people that deliver us the young and people of color votes that we have had such a hard time turning out, Molitsa said. And that wraps that one up as well. We'll have more, I think, to say about that, but maybe we'll leave the discussion of it for later on if we can get a hold of Armando in the next hour. But wanted to at least put that there on the record. What can I tell you? Mixed feelings about all of these things, and I hate to leave it at, well, gee whiz, both sides, but at least here both sides are Democrats, and I feel a lot better about recognizing some of the points that each of the sides have made. We'll discuss them in depth perhaps a little bit later. Time now to catch up on a couple other of the stories from the hard news side, though again there's plenty more commentary to come on this. Let's see. Just for the hell of it, let's throw in this piece of information. It didn't happen in this country, and neither did the next one I think I'll throw in. But BBC News reporting, interesting development. Italy, where I think we were just talking Italian politics the other day when we were talking about the interest that Russian oligarchs had in backing far-right Italian politicians in their quest, I guess, to make Italy great again. Italy seizes combat-ready missile in raids on far right. So there you have it. One side has milkshakes and the other one has air-to-air missiles. Like I said, both sides. Anti-terrorism police in northern Italy have seized an air-to-air missile and other sophisticated weapons during raids on far-right extremist groups. 3 people were arrested, 2 of them near Forlì Airport. Neo-Nazi propaganda was also seized. Air-to-air missiles, propaganda, whatever. The raids were part of an investigation into Italian far-right involvement in the conflict in eastern Ukraine, the Turin police said. The missile originated from the Qatari armed forces, the police said. And wonder, that's interesting. Well, let's see. Who's arming the Qatari armed forces? If we're arming Saudis and UAE who are blockading Qatar, it'd be curious to know who's supplying the Qatari armed forces and what they're doing, parting with those ordnance, given their precarious situation. But okay. And then passing it on to the Italian far right as middlemen to get it to presumably pro-Russian forces in Ukraine. It's a very interesting and convoluted way of getting armaments to them. The Turin Special Police Force, called Digos, led the operation, assisted by police in Milan, Varese, Forlì, and Novara. Okay. A little geography lesson there in Italian geography. Italian media named those arrested as, we get to say Italian names. Fabio del Bergiolo, I'm guessing. 50, an Italian ex-customs officer and far-right Forza Nuova party activist. Alessandro Monti, 42, a Swiss national. How do you like that? And Fabio Bernardi, 51, also Italian. Who knew about the Swiss far-right discontent? Initially, on July 15th, the police said the arrests were part of an investigation started about a year ago into far-right groups, quote, who have fought in Ukraine's Donbass region against the separatists. But the latest police statement did not mention groups fighting the pro-Russian separatists, referring only to an investigation into Italian extremists who had taken part in the armed conflict in Ukraine's Donbass region. The police did not make it clear which side the Italians were on in this case. Is it not clear, or did they make a decision not to make it clear? The missile appears to be a French-made Matra Super 530F. And chain of custody for that armament, I have no idea. During the operation, an air-to-air missile in perfect working order and used by the Qatari army was seized, police said in a statement. And it was variously reported as air-to-air missile and a ground-to-air missile. Apparently it's air-to-air, which, I don't know, does that limit its utility as a single piece of ordnance? I mean, I don't know if can you modify and launch an air-to-air missile from the ground? I'm not certain exactly what they thought they were going to do with this thing, or whether they had no idea what they were doing and just bought whatever they could get. During the operation, an air-to-air missile in perfect working order, was used by Qatari army was seized. Separately, a court in Genoa jailed 3 men on July 3rd who were found guilty of fighting alongside Russian-backed separatists who control a large swath of Ukraine's Donetsk and Luhansk regions. In the Genoa case, 2 men, Italian Antonio Cataldo and Albanian-born Olsi Krutani, got terms of 2 years and 8 months. The third, I've lost my place here now, turning off the alarm here. The third, a Moldovan citizen, Vladimir, do I have this right? Vrbici, got one, I'm sure I mispronounced that, but that's certainly what it looks like. Got 1 year and 4 months. More than 10,000 people have died in fighting since the heavily armed separatists launched an insurgency in eastern Ukraine, and we've lost sight of that one. In April of 2014, skirmishes with Ukrainian government troops continue, but the front line has remained generally static for more than a year. That is rather incredible. I mean, I just thought I would read the rest of the story so we could get some background information on what the hell's been going on there and who's backing who and where are the weapons coming from. I mean, mysterious and shrouded for me. I don't follow that. We'll be right back then. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Our music is a few seconds behind here, and I'm negotiating behind the scenes with Armando for his appearance. We decided we'll put things off just a little bit, and we'll sort of ad-lib it when the time comes. I wanted to put another story on the record here for us, just because I feel like, this one could change things a little bit. I'm still plowing through the Mueller report, trying to read through it rather carefully, although, every once in a while there's a new amazing moment from it. Often things that I knew already, but sometimes put in just a different light. Anyway, this has the potential to change things a little bit, and I thought I'd put this one out there on the earlier side this week before we turn to Armando. This is a CNN report on this story, and I guess an exclusive. I don't know if it's state exclusive. Security report reports reveal how Julian Assange of Wikipedia, turned an embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy in London, into a command post for election meddling. And, of course, we're less concerned with the logistics of how he arranged the furniture in there, and more interested in how was he really able to get any of this stuff in and out and use it in the first place, and were the Ecuadorians cooperative in this, or ignorant of what was going on, or both in some fashion? I don't know. Let's take a look at this. This is Marshall Cohen, Kay Guerrero, and Arturo Torres reporting for CNN, and let's run through this as quickly as we can. And I don't know. We'll just ponder it in the days to come. New documents obtained exclusively by CNN reveal that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange received in-person deliveries, potentially, what does that even mean? Potentially of hacked materials related to the 2016 U.S. election during a series of suspicious meetings at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. The documents build on the possibility raised by special counsel Robert Mueller in his report on Russian meddling that couriers brought hacked files to Assange at the embassy. The surveillance reports also describe how Assange turned the embassy into a command center and orchestrated a series of damaging disclosures that rocked the 2016 presidential campaign in the United States. Despite being confined to the embassy while seeking safe passage to Ecuador, and he didn't get that, Assange met with Russians and world-class hackers at critical moments, frequently for hours at a time. Now, I thought all this would have been done online, but it wasn't. That's the surprising part. He also acquired powerful new computing and network hardware to facilitate data transfers just weeks before WikiLeaks received hacked materials from Russian operatives. These stunning details come from hundreds of surveillance reports compiled for the Ecuadorian government by UC Global, a private Spanish security company, and obtained by CNN. They chronicled Assange's movements and provide an unprecedented window into his life at the embassy. They also add a new dimension to the Mueller report, which cataloged how WikiLeaks helped the Russians undermine the U.S. election. An Ecuadorian intelligence agency told CNN that the surveillance reports are authentic. The security logs noted that Assange personally managed some of the releases, quote, directly from the embassy, unquote, where he lived for nearly 7 years. After the election, the private security company prepared an assessment of Assange's allegiances. That report, which included open source information, concluded there was, quote, no doubt that there is evidence, unquote, that's kind of weird, no doubt there is evidence, okay, that Assange had ties to Russian intelligence agencies. I guess that, all told, nothing new in that one, but okay. UC Global did not respond to multiple requests for comment. Assange, a native of Australia, has always denied working for the Kremlin and has insisted that the source of the leaks, quote, is not the Russian government and is not a state party, unquote. Don't know if that really makes any difference when you're talking about Russian entities, but okay. He also said he would have published the damaging information about then candidate Donald Trump if he had received it, or I guess if he had seen it. I stuck an extra article in there. He would have published damaging information about Trump if he had received it. Big deal. The U.S. announced criminal charges against Assange earlier this year for his role in the 2010 leaks of secret diplomatic cables and Pentagon war logs, which WikiLeaks got from then U.S. Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning. British police yanked Assange from the embassy in April. He's now serving a 1-year prison term in London for skipping bail in the UK while aggressively fighting extradition to the US. WikiLeaks did not respond to requests for comment. Assange's lawyers declined to comment. Assange maintains his innocence, and WikiLeaks says the charges are, quote, the worst attack on press freedom in our lifetime, unquote. Well, they would say that. Assange sought refuge at the Ecuadorian embassy in June of 2012 to apply for political asylum and avoid extradition to Sweden, where he faced sexual assault allegations, which he denies. By the way, Donald Trump loves WikiLeaks, even though its founder and nominal head, maybe there's nobody else involved in the operation at all, for all I know. But this, despite the fact that he is a political asylee or seeking political asylum and running away from sexual assault allegations, which is everything that he says he hates about people trying to get into this country, and gosh, that's weird. The decision to offer Assange asylum was made by then Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa, who claimed he was protecting Assange from, quote, political persecution. The asylum also served two larger purposes. It heightened Ecuador's status on the world stage and brandished Correa's credentials as a leading U.S. antagonist in Latin America. It did. But he didn't get famous from it. Anyway, initially the diplomats hoped to take Assange swiftly to Ecuador, but that plan stalled amid British refusals to allow Assange safe passage outside the embassy. So he settled in for a protracted stay. Though confined to a few rooms inside the embassy, Assange was able to wield enormous authority over his situation. From the outset, he demanded and was granted high-speed internet connectivity, phone service, and regular access to professional visitors and personal guests. This arrangement enabled him to keep WikiLeaks active, the documents said. Assange also issued a special list of people who were able to enter the embassy without showing identification or being searched by security. Well, he was even granted the power to delete names from the visitor logs. Wow. To avoid surveillance cameras, Assange occasionally met guests inside the women's bathroom, according to security reports, which is, sometimes dangerous with sexual assault suspects, but I guess not always. This all leaves open the possibility that additional sensitive meetings took place but are still secret. Quickly, the once mundane diplomatic mission in the heart of London became a hotbed of tension and suspicion. Throughout Assange's stay at the embassy, Ecuador employed 3 security companies to conduct constant surveillance. Assange installed his own recording devices and used noise machines to stymie the snooping. According to the documents obtained by CNN, the task of controlling Assange proved difficult. Fistfights broke out between Assange and the guards. He smeared feces on the walls out of anger, but is otherwise a normal guy. Assange also maintained direct contact with senior officials in Ecuador, including former Foreign Minister Ricardo Patiño, and regularly used those connections to threaten embassy staff. What a fun person he is, according to the surveillance documents and 2 Ecuadorian government sources who spoke to CNN. He claimed he could get people fired, even the sitting ambassador. Assange's authority appeared at times to rival that of the ambassador. In December of 2013, Ambassador Juan Falconi wrote a letter to Assange and said that you cannot give instructions contrary to mine. CNN reached out to the 4 ambassadors who overlapped with Assange's time at the embassy. Can you imagine moving in as a new ambassador and having him there already? Only Falconi would comment, saying the Ecuadorian government had never pressured him to give Assange special treatment and that he had established rules for Assange to follow. Several current and former Ecuadorian government officials, including Correa and Patiño, did not respond to multiple requests for comment. While Correa was in office, he responded to criticism over harboring Assange by doubling down on the asylum offer and holding Assange up as a symbol of Ecuador's commitment to freedom of the press. I wonder how well they're doing on that one, but okay. Referring to Assange, Correa pointed out that the icon of freedom of expression chooses to take refuge in the Embassy of Ecuador in a 2012 interview with RT en Español. Guess what? It's a Spanish-language network controlled by the Kremlin. The Russian government operates television networks around the world to spread propaganda, and it reaches American audiences on its flagship English-language station, just RT. Despite the years of strife, Assange was allowed to stay and prepared to wield his power when the moment was right. That moment came in the summer of 2016, a pivotal time in the U.S. presidential campaign. By June, Trump and Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton had emerged as the de facto nominees of their parties and were gearing up for what would be a bruising general election. The campaign took a historic turn on June 14th when the Democratic National Committee announced that it had been hacked and blamed Russia, which Trump dismissed as a farce. You know all about that, of course. Assange was busy back at the embassy that month. Members of the security team worked overtime to handle at least 75 visits to Assange, nearly double the monthly average of visits logged by the security company that year. He met Russian citizens, and a hacker later flagged in the Mueller report as a potential courier for emails stolen from the Democrats. There is then embedded a timeline of the releases by WikiLeaks during the summer of 2016. We'll skip over that for now and read just the body of the article. Also in June, WikiLeaks secretly communicated with Russian hackers, and Assange publicly announced plans to release new material about Clinton. The Mueller report says the Russian hackers obscured their identities by using online personas for all their communications with WikiLeaks, which included emails and direct messages to WikiLeaks' account on Twitter. Assange took at least 7 meetings that month with Russians and others with Kremlin ties, according to the visitor logs, from which he was allowed to erase things, but okay. 2 encounters were with a Russian national named Yana Maximova, who could not be reached for comment, although almost nothing is known about Maximova. making it difficult to discern why she visited the embassy at key moments in June of 2016. And I guess it could be, by the way, as opposed to Yana Maximova, perhaps. I think they actually pronounce things that way. Anyway, during her 2 visits that month, she met with Assange in the middle of the day in the embassy's conference room. Assange also had 5 meetings that month with senior staffers from RT, the Kremlin-controlled news organization. U.S. intelligence agencies have concluded that RT had, quote, actively collaborated with WikiLeaks in the past and played a significant role in Russia's effort to influence the 2016 election and help Trump win. For several months in 2012, Assange hosted a television show on RT, I guess from inside the embassy. In June of 2016, RT's London bureau chief Nikolai Bogachikin visited Assange twice and gave him a USB drive on one occasion, according to the surveillance reports. That 5-minute visit was hastily arranged and required last-minute approval from the Ecuadorian embassy. From the ambassador himself. Okay. In an email to CNN, Bogachikin said RT has produced multiple programming featuring featuring Mr. Assange. Within that process, everything that is intrinsically involved in the production of content took place. Very helpful statement. The RT bureau chief previously mocked reports about his visits with Assange, jokingly tweeting that he gave the WikiLeaks founder a whole bag of Novichok, the chemical weapon, that last year was used to poison a traitorous ex-Russian spy. That's what they're calling him here in this article, who lives in the UK. Since Bogachikin's post last year, he has remained silent on Twitter. Maybe it was a bag of that stuff. Shortly after WikiLeaks established contact with the Russian online personas, Assange asked his hosts to beef up his internet connection. The embassy granted his request on June 19th, providing him with technical support for data transmission and helping install new equipment, the document said. This was the same day Assange and his lawyers met with then Ecuadorian Foreign Minister Guillaume Long. According to the surveillance reports, Long declined to comment for the story. It's unclear whether Assange told the Ecuadorians that WikiLeaks was working behind the scenes to acquire documents related to the U.S. election. The U.S. government never has publicly accused Ecuador of knowingly helping Assange or the Kremlin. As the election approached, security officials at the embassy noted that Assange released some of the hacked emails directly from the embassy, according to the surveillance documents. The Mueller report explicitly referenced that Assange had access to the internet from the Ecuadorian embassy in London. The rest of that paragraph, though, is heavily redacted. It's unclear whether Mueller ever obtained these surveillance reports as part of his investigation. Mueller concluded that hackers from Russia's military intelligence agency, known as the GRU, attacked democratic targets in the spring of 2016, removed hundreds of gigabytes of information, as we know. They created online personas, Guccifer 2.0 and DC Leaks, to transfer some of the files to WikiLeaks and publicly claim responsibility for the hacks, falsely disavowing any Russian ties. Mueller's team noted that it cannot rule out the stolen documents were transferred to WikiLeaks through intermediaries who visited during the summer of 2016. Assange has said a small group of associates helped him from the outside, but only to sift through the emails. The special counsel named one of those associates, German hacker Andrew Muller, believe it or not, Muller-Magun, and said he may have assisted with the transfer of those stolen documents to WikiLeaks. The Mueller report appears to contain additional details about this possibility, but those portions are redacted too, because they contain classified information about sensitive investigative techniques. Assange has known Muller-Magun for years. The hacker even showed up as a featured guest on Assange's short-lived television show on RT in 2012, discussing the future of the internet and digital privacy. He's also involved in mainstream technology groups and served on the board of ICANN, I-C-A-N-N, the international organization that governs internet domains. When contacted by CNN, Muller-Magun declined to comment about his meetings with Assange. He previously told the Washington Post that he was never in possession of the hacked materials before they were posted online. According to surveillance reports, Mueller-Magoon visited Assange at the London embassy at least 12 times before the 2016 election. During those few meetings, Mueller-Magoon was accompanied by another well-known German hacker, Bernd Fix, B-E-R-N-D, Bernd Fix, the report said. CNN, unable to reach Fix for comment. The Mueller report says that on July 6th, WikiLeaks reached out to the Russian online personas with a request to send anything Hillary-related as soon as possible because the Democratic National Convention is approaching and she will solidify Bernie supporters behind her after, referring to her opponent in the Democratic primaries, and you know who that was. The trio of hackers, Assange, Mueller-Magoon, and Fix, then gathered on July 14th, Bastille Day, for more than 4 hours, according to the security logs. The special counsel's report indicates that on this date, Russian hackers posing as Guccifer 2.0 sent encrypted files to WikiLeaks with the title Big Archive. Days later, on July 18th, while the Republican National Convention kicked off in Cleveland, an embassy security guard broke protocol by abandoning his post to receive a package outside the embassy from a man in disguise. The man covered his face with a mask and sunglasses and was wearing a backpack, according to surveillance images obtained by CNN. The security company saw this unfold on surveillance footage and recommended that the guard be replaced, but the Ecuadorian government kept him on the job. Same day, according to the Mueller report, WikiLeaks informed the Russian hackers that it had received the files and was preparing to release them soon. It's not clear if these incidents are related, and the contents of the package delivered to the embassy are unknown. WikiLeaks released more than 20,000 files from the Democratic National Committee on July 22nd, and the emails exposed how top officials preferred Clinton and tried to undermine Sanders. The party's convention, days later in Philadelphia, dissolved into a chaotic mess. I don't know if I would say that, but okay. A week that had been designed to engineer party unity transformed into a near mutiny, and the DNC chair, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida, was forced to resign. As Democrats tried to manage the fallout, Trump quickly upped the ante. And then, of course, the famous Russia, if you're listening comment on July 27th, referring to the contents of Clinton's private server. Mueller said the Russians were listening after all and tried for the first time to hack Clinton's office within hours of the Trump comment. While Trump and Clinton crisscrossed the country in the final weeks of the campaign, the Russians ramped up their efforts and Assange was toiling away on another major project. Russian hackers, posing as DC leaks, had reached out again to WikiLeaks and offered more materials, writing that, quote, "You won't be disappointed, I promise." According to the Mueller report, they later transmitted 50,000 emails stolen from Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta's inbox. The special counsel report pinpoints a potential date for the data transfer, September 19th. On that day, Assange met again with Mueller-Magoon, and the security guards observed Assange installing a new computer cables in his room, according to the documents obtained by CNN. WikiLeaks started releasing Podesta's emails on October 7th, and released new batches nearly every day before the November election. The media covered all the embarrassing details, including transcripts of Clinton's closed-door Wall Street speeches, sniping from staffers about her, quote, terrible instincts and frustrations about overlap between business and charity, which they dubbed Bill Clinton Incorporated. Trump touted the new leaks at nearly every stop on the campaign trail in the final weeks of the race, sometimes directly reading from emails and seizing on thinly sourced conspiracy theories. This just came out. WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. The guy that's headed by the guy seeking political asylum, trying to flee sexual assault charges. They're not sending their best, sometimes you might say. Trump, anyway, I love WikiLeaks, Trump said at a rally in Pennsylvania. You know about that and what makes Pennsylvania important. Kremlin-backed outlets, including RT, breathlessly amplified the leaks on social media. On at least 2 occasions, RT even published articles detailing the new batches of emails before WikiLeaks officially released them, suggesting that they were coordinating behind the scenes, which they deny. I think we're into the final section here. Not long after the Podesta emails began trickling out, with the elections fast approaching, the U.S. government raised concerns with Ecuadorian officials that Assange was using their diplomatic mission in London to help the Russians interfere in the election, a former U.S. official familiar with the matter told CNN. The U.S. protest came with an implicit warning, stop Assange or there will be consequences for Ecuador, just like there would eventually be consequences for the Russians for meddling in the election, and for Assange too, according to the U.S. official and documents obtained by CNN. Facing this ultimatum, Ecuadorian officials in the capital city of Quito decided on October 15th to cut Assange off from the outside world, shutting down his internet access and telephone service. Even this didn't stop the deluge of email releases, which WikiLeaks continued pumping out every day until the election. Ecuador soon released a public statement condemning WikiLeaks' involvement in efforts to interfere with the U.S. election, but reaffirmed its commitment to protecting Assange. As this geopolitical saga unfolded, the Ecuadorian embassy received calls from other countries asking about potential U.S. retribution and Assange's physical safety, their security report said. The situation intensified 3 days later. The security documents lay out a critical sequence of events on the night of October 18th. Around 10 p.m., Assange got into a heated argument with then Ecuadorian ambassador Carlos Abad Ortiz. Just before midnight, Abad banned any non-diplomatic visitors to the embassy and left the building. Behind the scenes, Assange communicated with the foreign minister in Quito. Within an hour of Abad's departure, he called the embassy and reversed the ban. By 1 a.m., 2 WikiLeaks personnel arrived at the embassy and started removing computer equipment as well as a large box containing about 100 hard drives, according to the documents. Wow. Security officials on site wanted to examine the hard drives, but their hands were tied. The Assange associates who removed the boxes were on the special list of people who couldn't be searched. The security team sent a memo back to Quito, raising red flags about this late-night maneuver, and said it heightened their suspicions about Assange's intentions. U.S. intelligence agencies have said from the very beginning that WikiLeaks got the stolen emails from the Russian government, which Mueller also alleged in his indictment against a dozen Russian hackers, but the suspects are all living safely in Russia, so the U.S. will likely never publicly produce a smoking gun or prove in court that Russia worked with WikiLeaks. Trump was inaugurated, as you know, January 2017, and continued to question whether Russia had meddled in the election. Assange's internet access was restored after the election, and he continued to meet with hackers, as well as an American lobbyist representing a prominent Russian oligarch. In Ecuador, Correa's, I guess, is that Roger Stone? Was that who it was that went over there? In Ecuador, Correa's presidential term ended in May of 2017, and he was succeeded by Lenin Moreno, a close ally who had been his vice president for more than 6 years. But after Moreno was elected, he quickly turned against Correa and started undoing many of his policies, including his friendly relationship with Assange. Justice Department lawyers secretly prepared a criminal case against Assange for the Chelsea Manning leaks. Federal prosecutors even turned to a controversial law to target Assange for actively soliciting and publishing classified materials, which is typically protected under the First Amendment. In April of this year, Moreno revoked Assange's asylum and said Assange had violated the norm of not intervening in internal affairs of other states. This cleared the way for the British police to forcibly remove Assange from the embassy when the first U.S. charges were unsealed. Assange hasn't been accused of any crimes related to his actions in 2016. He remains in a UK prison awaiting what will likely be a grueling battle over his extradition to the U.S., where he could face spending the rest of his life in prison. Meanwhile, he still has allies in Russia. Within hours of Assange's arrest, senior officials from President Vladimir Putin's government rushed to Assange's defense and slammed the U.S., for infringing his rights, declaring that the hand of, quote, democracy squeezes the throat of freedom. And, well, they are given to that sort of rhetorical flourish, aren't they? Okay, that is it. We have, in fact, wrapped up the entirety of the article. I don't know if we moved the ball ahead all that far, but I think it will become of more interest as we do more to digest the Mueller report, and if there isn't even any gas left in the Mueller report. Of course, his testimony before Congress also postponed, just like the vote on contempt of Congress for Barr and Ross. Not that it's going to mean anything. Maybe that's something that Armando wants to touch on, and we'll bring him in after the break. I just wanted to get that sort of out there and on the record and see if there was anything that would help inform my continued digestion of the Mueller report. We'll talk about that perhaps later in the week as well. But in the meantime, we'll take a 2-minute break, bring Armando in to try and wrap things up, talk a little bit more about what happened at Netroots Nation, at the squad, etc. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I now have Armando hooked up and hooked in and ready to go. We were just he was giving me a briefing on what might be coming up, but the second one will be a surprise to me because the music was ending. But
it'll be Trump related.
Okay, well then it's not much of a surprise to me at all, right. And it's but very welcome, of course. And so I had mentioned that I had seen you commenting earlier, and I think I saw Darkside chime in agreement with you. He also, I guess, saw Morning Joe and Joe Biden's appearance, the other Morning Joe. Both Joes were there this morning, I guess, but he was talking to Mika Brzezinski this morning and not performing particularly well, and you saw it, I didn't.
Well, let me tell you, I mean, I just happened upon it.
You weren't not a regular viewer?
I don't normally watch that show, but Mika Brzezinski was in Iowa where Biden had done his AARP speech, and that speech was notable because Biden lied about Medicare for all, believe it or not, in the sense that he said that if you do it, that means people are going to lose all their insurance until you implement it, which, of course, that's not how things work. But fine.
Not how any program would work.
We got to the lying stage of the Biden campaign, but that doesn't worry me so much. Politicians lie all the time, even ours. So that the thing that I struck, and I think I tell you that it was at the end of the day, because to me, it was very clear that Biden was sundowning.
Oh, this was a taped segment?
Yeah, it was taped from yesterday.
Okay.
In Iowa. He was confused. He couldn't finish a sentence. He didn't understand her questions. Now, you'll look at the stories, and they'll talk about one line that he sort of snatched out of his deep memory about if Trump, she'd say, how are you going to stand up to Trump? You did badly in the other debate, blah, blah, blah. And he's complaining about Kamala Harris, hitting him with a surprise attack at a debate, of all things, which is I don't understand why you would be surprised, but okay. That was the least of it. We know how badly he did. And obviously it's still bothering him because that's was foremost on his mind. But then when she asked him about Trump and how Trump was going to lie, Trump's going to say this, that,
he is.
The reality is that's not a surprise question for Biden either. It shouldn't be. Or maybe he's surprised that Mika, because Mika's a big Biden supporter. Don't kid yourself. This was a friendly interview.
Yes.
And Biden, first of all, didn't talk for a second, just put his hands up. Like, he didn't make fists, but sort of doing like a fighting stance, like he's going to get into a fist fight or something. But no words came out. And then she pressed him again. And he said, I'll say, come on, let's go run, or something like that. And then finally he ended up, and this is what's captured the headlines. I said, let's do push-ups.
Uh-huh.
Let's do push-ups.
All right.
But my biggest concern wasn't even how bad that answer was, and it was a bad answer because that's typical stupidity of Biden. That was I'll take him outside behind the gym at school or whatever nonsense. Which again, that's Onion Joe.
Yes.
And fine, but that wasn't even what was. That's what I'm saying. That doesn't even capture the moment. He did not understand. He could not finish words. He mumbled. He couldn't finish sentences. David, he was not all there. I don't know how anyone could watch that and think that his cognitive skills have not severely diminished in the last few years.
I guess
Joe Biden
possible.
is not physically and mentally up to this. And if you're one of those establishment types who get in the back room and the smoke-filled rooms, please do something about this. Joe Biden will not withstand a general election campaign. Forget about what you think about his career and busing or segregation. I'm talking the most basic cognitive skills are not present. Now, Donald Trump has a lot of those same problems. But Donald Trump has many other problems. And again, I'll take my senile old guy over their senile old guy if that's the choice I'm presented.
Yeah,
but I
I'd
think their
not.
senile old guy will beat our senile old guy because for most of the day, their senile old guy has a lot more energy than our senile old guy.
Oh.
He's not up to this, David. I wish people would look at that honestly and forget about what you think about Medicare for all or socialism or the squad or white working class. All that doesn't even matter. You watch this and you tell me that guy is going to run and win a general election campaign? I'm convinced that's not even possible.
Do you know if this is
I
circulating
think it should
somewhere?
be 5-alarm fire for Democrats who look at that and say, this guy cannot be our nominee. And I don't say just because Biden's old. Biden is old. And that's something I thought would be a problem in his presidency next year and whatnot. And I have many other problems with Biden. But I'm talking about this singular moment. I wouldn't say what I just said about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is coherent, cogent. He's lost a step, but not to the degree that I would say he doesn't know what's being asked.
Nah, I hadn't heard you say that.
Doesn't mumble. He knows what he wants to say. I honestly, if you have elderly grandparents or elderly parents, you would recognize what you just saw. A diminished capacity. For his sake, for our sake, for the country's sake, we cannot have Joe Biden as our nominee.
Well, I guess I do have the comment here from Karen who said that she's not a Biden supporter, but she watched and didn't think he did. Well, all she's able to say is that she didn't think he did so badly, or that he didn't do badly. But and it was a softball interview, to be sure. But
I would ask Karen this: you're telling me his answer to the questions, his response, physical, in terms of how he said it, his mumbling, his losing his train of thought, the long pause, the putting the hands up. You thought that was not the sign of somebody who has a diminished mental capacity? Well, then you and I just simply disagree.
Oh, that can happen.
I cannot imagine that if it was any other old person, you would say, oh, obviously he's old. It's, he's slowing down. It was the end of the day. He's sunned down a little bit, blah, blah, blah. But we're talking about the person who's going to be our nominee for president of the United States. And you're saying it wasn't that bad? Sorry. I cannot disagree more. And again, this isn't even about me being anti-Biden. I was shocked about how bad he was.
I guess. To be fair, and she now comments, she's like, I don't think I made it clear in reading her comment that she'd only heard excerpts of the interview, and she's like, well, apparently I'm going to have to go and sit down and watch the whole thing. We should try and find
Well, that's exactly my point. Everybody needs to actually watch that video.
I think we can all, fair enough, right? No one can disagree. You've got to watch it and then figure out what you think. Like I said, Dark Side, Stephen Andrew thought the same thing. I haven't seen it. I should try and dig it up. I'll maybe make an effort.
I fear Morning Joe's going to bury it because they're very pro-Biden, and they will not want that out there.
Well, there's only so much they can do.
Someone must have clipped it, but they have copyright.
Sure. I guess.
I don't know. This is fair use, I suppose, but it'll be interesting because I don't think the headlines are capturing it. Said, there's Joe Biden just being Onion Joe. Well, let's do push-ups.
You'll get all the analysis of it you need if, for whatever reason. I mean, I think Morning Joe is just one of those shows that puts its programming and archives out constantly, over whatever, the online content is always, or the content is always made available online. I guess if it's missing, there's your answer. They think it was damaging. If it's not, then they may also think it's damaging, but just be too embarrassed to hide it for their own sake. So we'll find it. Means we should be able to find it and watch it. So I'll make an effort to try and identify a source for it and give us all an opportunity to do it. All right. Well, I mean, that's a pretty serious consideration.
Listen, maybe you will have another take than I do. I
don't think much of them. So
all I'm saying is look at the video for yourself.
Yeah.
Look at the video for yourself.
Fair enough.
And tell me if I'm being unfair, because I don't think I am.
Okay.
And I attacked Biden on a lot of things, but not on being senile.
Yeah.
This is something that I'm reacting to. I have many substantive reasons and, political talent reasons for being against Joe Biden, and I am against Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
But I had never had to do this because I haven't seen this, and that's probably why they've been hiding him so much. So, so that's that part of the equation there. The other thing that I was looking at today, and you can see it now, there's a pivot going on Trump's comments. And the politically savvy pundit said this is where Trump wants to fight the fight. And Kevin McCarthy just has a little event. It says Trump wasn't racist and calls the squad the new socialist Dem majority, whatever the fuck. So the point I'm trying to make is Trump is a racist, and that's the card he knows how to play.
Yes.
And it's obvious that he bungled it, though these people say it was, people like Amy Walter and John Allen and Jake Tapper say this is brilliant. And by the way, if being a racist is brilliant politics, then Hillary Clinton was understating the amount of deplorables there are in the country, right?
Some of them are pundits.
When we were told it was terrible to call Trump supporters racist?
Yes, of course.
But now the basis of this analysis is, of course they're all racist, and that's why Trump is so smart to be a racist.
I guess so. I mean, I did see a lot of things that were similar, a lot of just terrible analysis. Even some that tried in the body of their work to make it plain that they were willing to call Trump racist and his comments racist. Jonathan Allen's coverage from yesterday, I'm thinking of.
Jonathan Allen had a terrible column.
Yeah.
In which he talked about how brilliant Trump was to be a racist. And I think it's wrong in two respects, in my opinion. It's wrong because that's not how you look at someone being racist.
Mm-hmm.
Leave the horse race aside for a second. The President of the United States is openly racist.
Yeah, bad news.
That's a crisis, or should be.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, I'm sure he would push back if I were talking to him about it. Well, read the body of the article. I very clearly
I read the body of the article.
Yeah,
he pushed
I did
back
too.
on me on that, and I told him I read it. It's a disgraceful
he didn't
article.
bother with me. But since I went fairly nuclear fairly quickly, he didn't bother
you?
with
I didn't
me.
know. I missed you on that because I was doing my own nuclear bombs.
Yeah. I was just concerned by, I mean, the first thing, of course, that grabs your attention is the headline, how Trump flipped the script on Pelosi and the squad. And my main beef, of course, was that's the takeaway of just being openly racist as well. Yeah, I'm flipping the script. And I mean, this was after Trump had his second go at them in the Rose Garden and stood up there and said, and they say they love Al-Qaeda, which he spelled wrong. They love Al-Qaeda and they hate this country with a passion. What did he say? An unbridled passion. Oh, and they hate Israel. They hate Jews. I mean, it was insane what he was doing. But yeah, he flipped the script. They're like, you know what? All right. I guess anything goes now. Jonathan Allen is a drug-dealing pimp who loves ISIS. He founded ISIS, as a matter of fact. Hey, woo! Flip the script, everybody.
How about this? He's an enemy of the people.
Sure, why not? I guess Trump's right. I'm switching.
Smart,
I'm going to be Trump voter
How
now.
savvy is that?
Yeah, right. Flip the script. He flipped the script on you.
He flipped the script on you, media. You're now the enemy of the people, boy. That's
Jiu-jitsu.
Just where he wants the 2020 campaign to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like, honestly.
You can't then just scream about how bad that is, Mr. President, then when you take racism and treat it as some football. But let's be callous and amoral for a second.
All right.
It's terrible political analysis, assuming they're all are racist. And you could tell why it was terrible political analysis, because he split his own caucus, his own people. Some of them had to denounce him, right? And
yeah, a few.
And you could say what some of them thought was the better line of attack. Lindsey Graham showed you. He called them all communists.
Yes, right.
McCarthyism was the better line of attack.
Bunch of communists.
Is politically savvy. Listen, this may be wrong, but as politics, McCarthyism was a better line of attack. And that's what McCarthy, ironically, Kevin McCarthy, engaged in McCarthyism, did this morning. He called them all socialists, right? Mm-hmm. And that's, if Trump was trying to be smart and politically
it wouldn't work.
Flipped its script or tie Democrats to the squad in a negative way, and get himself in a story that, frankly, was not good for us as it was. Now, he escalated it, but he escalated it by turning it into a Trump is a racist story. I don't know how that is helpful. Trump has all the racists already. He doesn't need to buttress his support with the racists.
No.
Does he?
I don't
Was there
think
some
so,
question of who the racists were going to vote for in 2020?
I guess there's some question, not who they would if they showed up, but maybe they're demotivated. I don't know.
Well, he remotivated the racists, I guess, is an argument. But remember, some of the Trump supporters don't like being called racist, right? And I guess that was also another theory that, now we're playing into their hands by calling the Trump racist. It's like, I don't think so. I really don't. Think that at all, but if he wanted to, let's say, which was John Allen's theory, that what Trump wanted was to join the squad at the hip with Democrats, and by making them defend the squad against racist attacks, Trump's plan worked, because now they've defended the squad. And again, this is just stupid analysis, but suppose you're right. The Democrats have come out and defended the squad against racism and actually settled their own stupid food fight at the same time. But that's good for Trump somehow. Trump, because in 2020, the thing we're going to remember about this story is that the squad and Pelosi were in a food fight. No, we were never going to remember that. And the only thing, what do you remember about Charlottesville?
What do I remember?
I'm asking just generally a question, because it's a similar thing that he did in Charlottesville. So tell me, what do you remember about Charlottesville?
Very fine people on both sides coming.
Exactly. Yeah. Who got hurt by Charlottesville? Was it the Democrats who defended the Antifa or whatever the heck they think that we defended? Does anybody know what the Antifa is?
Many people think they do. But
the people who already hate us know.
Yeah.
Nobody who No swing voter knows what Antifa is.
Yeah, very few. I guess there are probably some who, I heard they were just as bad, but,
Look, and in 2020...
They don't really know, obviously.
The presidential election will be against the Democratic nominee, whoever that's going to be, versus Donald Trump. It's not going to be AOC. It's not going to be whoever else you want it to be. Okay? Those people will be irrelevant in 2020. People forget what presidential campaigns are like. It's all about the actual presidential candidates. The Democrats, their platform. Nobody cares about the platform. Oh, the candidate in district such and such. Nobody cares about the candidate for district such and such in Wyoming. It's all about the presidential election. We are such a presidential election focused country that nothing else matters.
Yeah, there are, small instances where among the people in the press and ultimate, political junkies. Well, yeah, he declined to comment or wouldn't disavow the racist comments from the candidate and da da da. Yeah, and as you pointed out the other day, you and Greg both, they spent everything they had on the Republican side, 10 times to say every presidential election and every midterm election is about Nancy Pelosi, and she was the speaker, and it never worked.
And it never worked, and it will never work.
That's true.
It might work in midterms.
Yeah, better. You got a better chance. It just never did. But yeah, even so, it didn't.
Or at least marginally work. So this is not just callous, amoral, and a disgrace as journalism. It's just stupid, in my view. And now they're trying to save Trump's bacon here by making it about socialism. But it's too late. And Trump can't help it. He did that thing again. And he's still telling people to leave the country.
Yeah, I mean...
Because he's a racist, and that's the first thing he does, is be a racist.
It was literally the first thing he did upon waking up and rolling out of bed this morning.
Exactly. They don't get it. This isn't savvy strategy. This is who he is. He's a racist. That's what he does. Racism.
Yeah.
Now, it worked in 2016 because there's a lot of racists, and most of them are Republicans.
Plus economic anxiety.
Well, obviously this is not an economic anxiety issue now, is it?
No, I mean, I think that's clear.
So it turns
President
out
says the economy is awesome.
That Trump being a moderate isn't the argument that they wanted to make it. It's always been about the racism and the bigotry. That's what it's always been. It's about white grievance. I know that's hard for some people to accept. They want it to be about economic anxiety. They want it to be a normal political calculation, but it's not. It's racism. It's George Wallace. This is not something we haven't seen in the United States. It's the whole Southern recalcitrance to Brown versus Board of Education. Look, that's one of the reasons Biden has a problem. He said nice things about the racists.
Yeah, that didn't help too much.
No, it didn't. There is if there's one thing that's clear between the parties, one party condones racism, and one party mostly condemns racism.
Yes.
And people line up on whether they're on the side of the racism or they're against it. That's just how it is. I mean, it's the fundamental fault line between the parties. You can argue tax cuts and activist government, the old mantras, and the libertarians will tell you limited government.
Right.
That's all nonsense.
Well, it has to be now.
About race.
Yeah. I mean, well, all the other things have fallen apart. There are still some people, I guess, whose brands are dependent on insisting that those things are true, and it's sad.
No,
but...
in the Democratic Party, we have tremendous ideological fault lines.
Yeah.
We do argue about ideology and the role of government and what we should do, and sometimes we demagogue those issues, but they're actual, policy issues. Right? That's not what Republicans do. They don't argue about policy issues. They're for tax cuts and they're for racism. What else does you think the Republican Party stands for?
No, well, there's nothing that stands anymore to reason. It can't be, deficit hawks because we now are posting.
Well, they never were.
Deficits, and they're
not even they're not even Russia hawks anymore. Obviously,
right. I mean, the deficit hawk thing was done in done by the end of the Bush administration. So
I would tell you one thing: if Donald Trump came out and started condemning Republican racism, that's when he would lose his base.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't, no real reason to expect that he would ever entertain such an idea.
But people, when will his base abandon him? When he abandons racism.
Yeah. Although I guess there's room for him to just say, yeah, we definitely we deplore racism, and it's okay because we're not racists. We're not. What we're doing is telling the truth, and everyone would understand
is
that.
There's not a racist bone in our bodies.
Yeah, I said it. I'm the least racist person you'll ever meet. And you're in fact the most racist person I
know about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are more racist people. I just don't know their names. But we've seen pictures of them on the internet. But I mean, I don't know. Obviously, from time to time he drags that out, and it's something that he does performatively for his deplorables, is absolve them of racism by simply pronouncing them absolved of racism, and then they go back and be racist. That's nothing new there. But okay, I don't know. I just find it pretty interesting, and I don't know what mainstream Republicans are going to do with it. I asked that question this morning when I saw Lisa Murkowski's tweet. This is, this out of line, and it's got to stop. She wouldn't say racist, but we know what she meant. You know what she was complaining about. It has to stop. Well, what if it doesn't stop, but rather than stopping, it starts anew as soon as the president wakes up from his next nap? Oh, well, I don't know. Nothing, I guess. Bye. Going back to Alaska. So I don't know what to tell you. I've found a source. We'll see if we can't find a place where we can all watch the Joe Biden thing. So at least we'll get a chance to review that.
People can see it?
Well,
I would love to get
if I get
reactions to this.
I clicked on it and it took 25 minutes to load. So far I'm not positive that it's really there. So who knows? Maybe everyone's watching it or they're erasing it. I'm not sure which. But if anybody has got it on TiVo and can make a clip out of it, even if it's just videoing your television, go ahead and do it and send it over. In the meantime, we'll search the official document again and see if we can't make it work. But
I hate to make Mark Anderson do a lot of work here, but boy, if people could get to see, it's about 4 or 5 minutes of what in particular I'm thinking of.
Okay.
Because there's a whole other section where of course says, we got to go.
Well, we do have to go. That'll come up in a minute. But I guess Trump is already on the case, as I thought he might be an hour ago, tweeting, those tweets were not racist. I don't have a racist bone in my body, which he said a million times before. I don't know if you were referring to this particular tweet, but I don't have a racist bone in my body. He may not have any bones in his body, by the way. I've had a look. The so-called vote to be taken is a Democrat con game. I guess he's talking about the resolution coming up today. Republicans should not show, quote, weakness and fall into their trap. This should be a vote on the filthy language, statements, and lies told by the Democrat congresswomen, who I truly believe, based on their actions, the same garbage. It's nonstop. I shouldn't even do it the favor of reading it out loud. But yeah, I was really taken aback, for instance, by the Jonathan Allen thing, despite his efforts to, look, I said the word racist and everything. But there was a lot of super savvy analysis yesterday that really annoyed me. And like you said, it's going to take about 10 seconds for him to say something equally disgusting about the press. And then we'll be back to oh my God, it's an outrage again. The declaration yesterday was all bets are off. Once again, LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. It's fair game for you to go out there and say President Trump is Adderall addicted, brain damaged moron who wouldn't be fit to, basically can't live outside of assisted living, period. And he's on his way out. He's a walking corpse, likely to drop dead at any moment, and we all ought to be praying for it. Go ahead and say it. And then, if anybody gives you a problem, you tell them you're flipping the script and everything's cool. I'm sure Jonathan Allen will give you his stamp of approval. He won't. Of course, you'll be a filthy, disgusting communist yourself before the day is out.
Asymmetry and all these things. It's an old story, but at any rate, they're wrong.
Yeah. Absolutely true.
Level wrong, but wrong.
Yeah. Well, okay. We got to wrap things up, but thanks for coming on and talking more about it. I think we still have yet more to
it's a continuing
discuss.
Story.
But not only about Trump, but about what's been going on. I wanted to get a little bit more into at some point. I guess, although maybe it's just time to brush past it and say there really was a major story about this doesn't happen to blue dogs inside the caucus. But I think we all kind of innately get that. And maybe we'll pretend I'm being big about it, but it's really the fact that I'm running out of time. I'm willing to brush past it and say,
we'll have to leave it
politics.
there.
Yes, right, exactly. The worst thing ever. It happens even to us. Thanks, Armando.
All right, talk to you later.
All right, talk to you later on. Tomorrow being Wednesday, we'll be talking to Joan McCarter and Greg Dworkin once again. Now, though, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what he's got on tap here. The secret to cracking Mueller at next week's hearing, if they don't push it back even further, boils down to 3 critical questions. I won't tell you what they are. He will. That's the point of his program coming
From
next.
Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
He's got more for you, of course. Trump's lying lawyers are doing permanent damage to the Justice Department. We know about that. The Trump administration takes another stab at hurting federal workers. And it took Trump 195 days to finally nominate a permanent defense secretary, or at least that's the claim. I haven't seen the paperwork. Have you? That's all next.